This podcast is all about getting divorced without losing your mind, where Corey Shapiro, a seasoned New York City divorce attorney, shares valuable insights from his book, Getting Divorced Without Losing Your Mind. He'll teach you how to be more creative and less reactive in your divorce. He also dives into discussions with experts and thought leaders on navigating divorce intelligently and calmly.
Welcome to Getting Divorced Without Losing Your Mind, the book and podcast to help you get more creative and less reactive in your divorce. I am Corey Shapiro, your host, and I'm here to talk today about a new topic because our last multi-part series was about the divorce budget, and we're moving on. That was a good foundation for what we're talking about because we're talking about divorce attorney tactics. This is lawyer on lawyer tactics. This is what happens behind the scenes. But I want you to know what really is going on because you're going to get the fallout. And you don't know if you have a wise, smart attorney who's going to filter this information and ignore or be able to neutralize a lot of these tactics. So let's just go over an overview. We're going to have 4 videos on the divorce attorney tactics. Today, we're going to talk about the swarmer, which is really just being overwhelmed by like bees or flies. And then we're going to talk about next time the brawler. Those have, one issue they're really, want to knock you out with. Then we have the boxer, who's more into counterpunching, more tactical, more efficient with the budget. And then we have the top dog who can do everything so well. If you have a top dog on the other side, you're going to be in for spending a lot of money in your divorce, unless you can tame this top dog, because it can really get crazy. All right. So we start off our podcast with a quote, and it's no different than today. We're going to have some wisdom. We got the owls up there helping us bring our best selves. And don't we have to bring our best selves, especially when we're so stressed, so emotional? So hard to do. Can we just take 15 seconds just to pause and get into that state that brings our best self? Just 15 seconds. Yeah, that little shift. And that's what we're doing when we start with these quotes. I think that's why they start chapters of books. And that's where I got the idea of is starting a chapter with a quote to set the stage. And our quote today is from Warren Farrell, and it goes like this. Asking the legal system to resolve divorce is like asking a boxing coach to be our marriage counselor. Yeah, that is 100% right. Why do we need this legal system to help us get divorced in a very personal, intimate relationship, especially with children involved? Now, if I was, ruling the world and I had my perfect idea, I would say we should have an administrative system, a 2-tiered system, an administrative system, and then maybe a more of a legal system for people who act out. For example, when you get a marriage license, it's done orderly. Most people can follow the rules. You can even do it virtually in some areas. And if there's any problem, anything difficult, anything needs to be expedited, maybe that's where you would have to go to someone else. And I'm telling you, doing that will free up a lot of these judges to deal with the most difficult, most complex cases. So that's what I would say. And I think the 2 big issues we need to focus on for this perfect world is mandatory disclosure. There's so many games of discovery. If you're in one of those types of divorces with assets, they're just playing games, hard to get all this information. It takes time. And the other thing is, you want to have a mandatory settlement conference. I would call it a mediation, but I don't want to imply that this mediation is about being friendly or about being transformative. It's really more about just talking to someone who you can trust, who you can tell them what your reasonable positions are. And then they can maybe go back and forth through, what's called shuttle diplomacy or caucusing. You're not necessarily in the same room because there's probably a lot of tension. Doesn't need to be. You're just trying to move on. You're just trying to resolve issues. That's what I think should happen. And then for the more difficult cases, you can go to court. You can see a judge if you need to. All right, so let's get started with our first divorce attorney tactic. That's the swarmer. That's the death by 1,000 cuts. That's, making mountains out of molehills. And I've been maybe thinking about this because I just finished a 10-part series on Shogun on Hulu. Fully recommend. But they had an obsession about, ways of dying. And the swarmer's way of dying is that 1,000 cuts overwhelming you on non-issues, but it adds up. And it adds up on the budget. And you want to be efficient on your budget, right? Unless you have an unlimited budget, and let me just tell you something, you don't, because you don't have unlimited energy, you don't have unlimited time. And if your kid's involved, you have to have a good co-parenting relationship. Think of the long game. Think of what's going to happen at their wedding. Can you make that day about them where they're happy? Or is it just going to be drama? If you have drama at your children's wedding 10, 20 years after your divorce, you did something wrong. So it starts here. So let me tell you a little bit more about the swarmer so you can be more efficient and you can neutralize them. So don't get worried. First, they're going to bring up 10 issues. They can bring up 100 issues. But again, one of those issues, one of the 10 issues is only going to be important. Maybe the concept could be called throwing spaghetti on the wall, seeing what sticks. But it's so hard to ignore the 90% because you don't know what to filter. And that's why you need a good attorney who will filter, who's wise, who's experienced, and not interested in just responding to all this nonsense that the swarmer attorney brings up. Let me give you an experience in my world. I don't do unscheduled meetings in most cases, especially with opposing counsel. Okay. There's no unscheduled meeting with judges, so there should not be any unscheduled meetings. And also I want an agenda because, time is money and I want to know why we're meeting. Why can't it be just an email or a letter? But if someone's going to call me, it should be scheduled. Maybe there's some emergencies, but I can call back in a few hours if they leave a message. They're going to say, they'll leave a message and I'll tell you it's an emergency. But most cases, it's not. And I had this new case in my practice when I'm not doing this podcast, when I'm not writing this book. I'm a divorce attorney in New York City. I actually record this podcast out of my office in New York City. And a few years ago, I got this new case where the opposing counsel called my office unscheduled, so I wouldn't take it. Then they literally called my cell phone. I'm not even sure how they got that. And then they called back to my office, told my staff that they're just going to hold. And they literally held on the phone for about 30 minutes before they gave up. Flashing red, it's like a little, duel between me and this person. But I didn't give in. And there was no emergency because I'm not dealing with the swarmer increasing the budget. And that's it. So can you ignore the 95%? Yes, you can. I know it's going to be hard to do, but you can. You got to talk to your attorney and learn about the filtering. I know there's going to be FOMO. I know you're going to want to respond, but that's the quicksand you're going to fall into. So I hope you're going to be able to do this. Now, let me just give you a note. These ideas, these tactics are really geared for competitive divorces. And you probably are not listening or reading the book if you're in one of these collaborative divorces. These collaborative divorces can be charged, they can be energized, but they're not the same as a competitive divorce where it's win at all costs. Okay. And a win at all costs, that's where these tactics really come up. A more collaborative divorce is either going to be a win-win or maybe a diplomatic, where maybe, you have to give up some short-term gains for, a future result. So let me just briefly review the 4 styles. Today, we talked about the swarmer. We went a little bit in depth, overwhelming you with nonsense, with garbage. Then we're going to talk about the brawler who's focusing on one issue, trying to knock you out. Then we're going to discuss the episode after that, the boxer, a little bit more efficient on the budget. Good boxers can counterpunch because it's all not about playing defense. You got to play some offense in this game. And then finally, the top dog, bow to the top dog. Those are the gold-plated attorneys here in New York City making over $1,000 an hour. They can do every style. The only problem with them, and I hinted to it, is they're super expensive. And the system doesn't necessarily rein in these top dogs unless you have some strong clients who really want to just work something out of court. We saw this. Remember, I told you, if you have a lot of money, maybe it can happen. And that's what we saw with some of the billion divorces that happened. I think the Jeff Bezos divorce, they used some top dogs and they resolved things out of court. There was abundance. There was enough money to go around. No problem at all. All right, let me give you some homework, not to scare you, but let's make this actionable. So think about this. If you have 5 issues in your divorce, let's just hypothetically say there's 5 issues in your divorce that the other side's bringing up. Okay. 4 of those issues are nonsense, irrelevant, but they're designed to emotionally trigger you. Now, the question is, how much of your budget, your time, your energy, your emotion, your money are you willing to invest in responding to these 4 issues? And can you ignore? And I know it's hard to ignore in the beginning. I know it's hard to ignore, but can you do that? All right, next week, as I said, we're going to get into the brawler. So be ready to learn a little bit about the differences between the swarmer, who's dealing with so many nonsense issues, and the brawler, who's really focused energy on maybe 1 or 2 issues. And listen, I appreciate you joining, working on your divorce, not just in it. It takes courage to step away, to settle, to be more mindful, especially when you're grieving, especially when you're in such a difficult situation, especially when you don't know who to trust and who to believe. And you think things are just going to be this way for a while, this toxic situation you're in, and you just want to move on. And I hope the resources, the podcast, the book helps you get even 1% closer to being more creative, less reactive in your divorce. If you find the information in the podcast and the book helpful, please leave us a review either on Amazon or where you watch or listen to your podcasts. I'm Corey Shapiro. Join us on our next episode of Getting Divorced Without Losing Your Mind.
Thank you for tuning in to the Getting Divorced Without Losing Your Mind podcast. We would love to hear your feedback. Send Corey an email to feedback@gettingdivorced.org. And if you've read his book, please consider leaving an Amazon review. This podcast offers general information only. It cannot replace legal advice. If you need tailored advice, contact an attorney licensed to practice in your area.